Hello, this is Dan Klaskins along with Ashley Burns. We're back here with another DAV Podcast. It's episode 17, The Minority Veteran Experience. Today we'll take a dive into some of the challenges some of our minority veterans face and get you caught up on some great stories as well. And if this is your first time to the podcast, welcome. We always love our new listeners and our loyal subscribers too. You can keep up with it by subscribing on Apple's podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, as well as dav.org/podcast. You can find all of our episodes there. And Ashley, back at it again, another important topic to discuss here.
Yeah, I think that we often pride ourselves in the military and veteran community of being very open and accepting. And while on a one-to-one basis, a lot of times that feels very true, I think, it certainly hasn't always been the case. And policies of the past have really hindered the careers and lives of a lot of underrepresented individuals that have served in our nation's military. And we know that in turn can impact how they see their service and how they choose to interact or don't interact within the veteran community once they're out of the military. So to talk about that a little bit more, our own Todd Hunter spoke with Lindsay Church, who is the executive director and co-founder of Minority Veterans of America, to talk about her personal experience, something that's not uncommon for those who for years lived in fear and solitude and silence while serving shoulder to shoulder with their brothers and sisters in arms.
So do me a favor, give us a quick summary of your service in the Navy as well as the organization you started and how it came about.
Absolutely. So I served in the Navy. I was a third-generation service member from my family. My mom served in the Navy. My grandfather served in the Navy. I served as a Persian Farsi linguist. I went to the Defense Language Institute. About a year into my service, I got hurt and had a surgery that didn't go well and ended up being medically retired from the Navy in 2012. So from there, I went home to Seattle, Washington, and then later co-founded the Minority Veterans of America. We were founded in Seattle in 2017, myself and my co-founder, Catherine Pratt, who's a Korean-American woman veteran. Between the two of us, we had been in the veteran space and not found it to be perfectly welcoming to who we were and our identities, that our lived experiences. So between the two of us, we recognized the moment that we lived in that I was never going to understand what it felt like to live as a person of color in this country, and she was never going to understand what it felt like to be queer or non-binary in this world. So between the two of us, we understood that we couldn't understand each other's lived experiences, but that we understood mutual marginalization, and that between the two of us, we could understand what oppression felt like, and that when we came together, we could fight together to create a larger voice. So we recognize too that that many organizations exist for one minority group only. So if you look at LGBTQ vets, there's only 1 million of us, so we only have such a voice and a reach. Same thing with women vets, 2.2 million women veterans out of the community, about 10 to 12%. It's not enough to create a majority that folks will actually listen to us. The same thing even with veterans of color. There's 5.5 million veterans of color in this country, and that's about a quarter to a third of the veteran community. But still, you look at the communities that are even within that context, they're divided and don't necessarily have a united voice, which has led to a lot of repressive systems continuing to perpetuate and live on and impact the way that we lived our lives. So between the two of us, we decided that we were going to start an organization that was an intersectional movement of minority veterans coming together to create a larger voice and change.
Obviously, everyone is different, but can you describe a little bit what the general experience is like as a minority in the military? Paint that broad picture for us.
Of course. I can only speak from my own experience, obviously. I can just tell you that I served under Don't Ask, Don't Tell for all but 3 months of my service. I'm a queer human being. I destroyed every partnership that I could in those 4 years. I lived a life of solitude and didn't really tell people who I really was. I was always honestly constantly afraid that I was going to be discharged for my sexual orientation and not for how well I did my job. I literally fought with people about whether or not my hair was within regulations, would get lit up on the quarterdeck for absolutely no reason except that I looked different and that I looked gay. And so even I could tell you stories about folks that shouldn't have been saying the things that they were about that I don't belong in their Navy, that I don't belong serving here, and that I'm a distraction to unit morale and discipline, or good order and discipline. And it's the same. They've used that excuse for a long time to marginalize minorities. Even if you look back to segregation of units, that good order and discipline was always a good reason to create policies that were really othering, that destroyed a lot of lives. I know that when I got out of service, I suffered this fracture of identity, right? So I lived my whole life in service that I knew that I had to keep my personal life and my military life separate. So when I got out of the military, my choices were I felt like I only had two. One was to be a part of the veteran community, and one was to be a part of the queer community, but I couldn't be both. It literally caused major anxiety when it meant to be a part of an LGBTQ space, because I chose to be a veteran when I got out. But I shouldn't have had to choose, but we always do. Yeah. Whether or not we're going to submit to the treatment that comes from being a minority in this space or not is a choice. But it's deeply harmful. It's deeply harmful to our experiences, to our identities, and to constantly live in fear that somebody's going to be able to use a policy or a procedure or a law to ban our existence. Even if you look at the trans ban, the same thing. Somebody uses an executive order to deny the existence of trans service members. And that can happen with the flick of a pen.
You touched on something I wanted to hit there. You said, you're living in fear. And I imagine a service member who is living in fear and not being able to be their true selves while on duty, that has to affect their job, which then affects unit readiness and over not just morale, but readiness and the ability of everyone to do the job. But
imagine being afraid you're going to slip at any point, right? You're going to accidentally tell somebody that your partner's name was, a woman's name. How dare you? Or that you are going to share with the wrong person that you're trans, or that you're going to, you constantly live in fear that you're going to slip and that you're going to all of a sudden give up your, be subject to disciplinary action. And not just disciplinary action. When we talk about the discharges here, we're talking about something that lives with you forever. You're not just getting fired from a job. Everywhere that you go that asks you if you're if you have an honorable discharge, you still have to say, no, I don't. I have a dishonorable discharge. And they're trying to make it right by going back and doing discharge upgrades, but that stuff should have never happened.
You also mentioned, when you were getting out, that transition was to either be in the veteran community or either be part of the LGBTQ community, and you couldn't be both. Can you elaborate a little bit on just kind of the feeling of having to make that choice and what that experience is? Not only mentally, but kind of the transition experience of getting out and rejoining the civilian world.
So I had a terrible transition, not from the paperwork aspect, but from the mental health aspect. So I had a great, I was part of the original pilot program where they did the VA claim and your DOD claim at the same time, back in 2010 maybe. So I was already set up with VA benefits. So I was very fortunate in that I was medically retired, and that my mom is a veteran, so she was able to help me navigate some of these systems and getting enrolled in VA care.
She kind of knew the ins and outs.
That was literally a lifesaver. I can't imagine, and I've had to do it here in transitioning from Seattle to Richmond. I moved, and just getting enrolled in VA benefits just to get set up at the hospital was a maze of itself. And I know the system pretty well now. So I'm very fortunate that I had my mom, but not that many people do have a parent that can walk them through the system. So I transitioned well when it came to some of the paperwork. I still had to go through, the getting transitioned from the temporary disabled list to the permanent disabled list, and getting that mental strain of always wondering if the Navy is going to come back and tell you you're not disabled enough and pull you back, despite your injuries. So I got back in 2012. I was supposed to be back in 2014. I was medically retired. I was lost and confused and had no idea what I was going to do, because I was not supposed to be home yet. I was supposed to be home in 2014, but I really wanted to do a career. So when I got home, I threw a Hail Mary to the University of Washington and literally filled out my application in the box. I don't actually know what I wrote in that letter. So the first couple of years, I just kind of wandered aimlessly and just didn't talk to anybody. So at that point, I hadn't chosen to be a veteran or a queer person because I was afraid to be either. Over time, I finally realized if I was going to stick around for grad school that I had to get connected to veterans. So I ended up in the Student Vet Center, working in that space. And there was a level of camaraderie that I really enjoyed, but there was also a level of othering that really sucked. Like my first day in like working in that space, like there were gay jokes that were just flying everywhere, and it was just inappropriate and also like juvenile. But there were other parts of the camaraderie that I really needed at the time, so like I chose to stick it out. At the same time, like the student or the queer student center was right next to us. I literally couldn't walk through the door. It intimidated me to even walk through that door. I couldn't muster up the courage. I didn't step into it until I was a staff member at the university, like 3 years later, because I was just nervous and scared that they were going to know who I was, or that they were going to hate veterans, or that like I didn't know how to be queer anymore because I had hidden it for so long. There's also like a deep level of shame that I had for like denying my existence. My own community, I turned my back on, and so I felt a deep level of shame for that. But like, I knew I was going into the diaspora trial, and my level of service was more important than my queerness. And there's a level of like betrayal that you feel for your community in that moment. And it took me years until I was able to break that. I ended up on a round table talking about LGBTQ stuff, and I was like the token veteran. And I didn't know. I thought I was going to be the token LGBTQ person on the veteran panel, but it was actually the other way. So I stumbled into an LGBTQ panel and really realized like, oh, I belong here. I need to be here. I need to be talking about LGBTQ veteran issues. I need to be talking about it here, and I need to be talking about it in the veteran space. And so I started to come into my own and realize, like, actually, I'm a better advocate. I'm a better person. I'm a better leader when I can be fully myself. Like, that's what I had been hiding for so many years, and I had never really come into myself because I was always hiding it.
Sounds like that panel, it was the precursor, if you will, to Minority Veterans of America, right? That's what got the ball rolling for you?
It did. It was right around that time was about when we started MBA and really started getting active in our communities and really started getting, I mean, at that point I joined the Seattle LGBTQ Commission. Like I just got engaged anywhere that I could, and we started really pushing both myself, like when Catherine and I talked, it was, I met Catherine, we were doing student veteran diversity panels or like diversity work groups and stuff like that. And she came to me. Her dad was a veteran, and she didn't think that she literally like applying to grad school. This woman is one of the most brilliant humans I've ever met. She's an MIT grad. And she also looked up on her application that whether or not she qualified as a veteran, because she wasn't in combat. She wasn't like, she didn't do the jobs that her dad did, but she actually wondered if she counted as a veteran. And I like, that's sad because like, we don't know that we count.
Well, you guys do, and I'm glad that MBA exists to let everyone know that they does. I mean, anyone who serves knows that it takes a team, and your service, no one's service should ever be discounted. I want to talk now. We mentioned it earlier about the other than honorable or OTH discharges. Correct me if I'm wrong, but those are pretty disproportionately handed out to minority veterans, if you will, based on race, sexuality, what have you. Can you talk a little bit about those discharges and why they're a problem as far as access to VA care and benefits and military benefits?
Right. So there are several minority groups that are disproportionately impacted by OTH discharges. So when you're talking about OTH, you're looking at bad conduct or other than honorable. So you're looking at communities that are predominantly racial and ethnic minorities. So looking at Black, African American, Latinx, and Indigenous folks are largely the largest groups of incarcerated veterans and disproportionately impacted by the justice system as a result. So in addition, you also see the legacy of Don't Ask, Don't Tell in the trans ban of there was supposed to be nobody under the trans ban that got an other than honorable bad conduct discharge. But we also know that all of the military's justice system is completely arbitrary and based on the person that's implementing justice. We've seen this happen in the cases of military sexual trauma. We know the inherent bias is there. Like when you know that like the person that there's inherent bias in all of the like criminal justice proceedings within the military. Like if we hold inherent bias, we have to know that we use these systems to perpetuate harm. If there is a disparity and we know that Black and African American, Latinx, and Indigenous folks are all more likely to be incarcerated, but also more likely to have other than honorable discharges, there's a linkage there. So between racial ethnic minorities, folks that served in or don't ask, don't tell, and MST survivors, because this happens to a lot of MST survivors that self-medicate as a result of their MST and actually end up going through disciplinary proceedings and ending up in other than honorable bad conduct or even general discharges. So the result of that is the lack of ability to access care. There's been a lot of work done on this in Congress. I know folks have been doing work on trying to figure out how do we, what types of baseline care do we provide folks with OTH with bad conduct discharges. And there's been some movement on it, but I also think there's our community still has a really deep stigma for folks that have these discharges. But if we're really going to be self-reflective here, we have to recognize that folks have been self-medicating and end up in the justice system as a result of the trauma that we serve or that we have from service, and start to really recognize that many folks are a result of military service and the trauma that we carry, rather than actually looking at them as criminals.
From my understanding, a lot of it is really conduct, based on PTSD. I know that some women will get other honorable discharges for becoming pregnant at the quote unquote wrong time,
or becoming pregnant as a result of your military sexual trauma. That happens. I know folks that's happened to.
I'm sorry. I'm just
devastating.
that boggles my mind.
It should. I mean, this is literally how the perpetuation of harm continues. We don't know, and even as individual service members, when we are serving, we don't know what we are, the bigger parts of the system that are happening at the same time. So we don't even know that these problems are really existent in our military. And it's hard, as veterans, to really look back and be reflective about our service and understand and really sit with the harm that military service has caused many, many, many people.
And so then, when they're out, and people will be continuing to reckon with what happened, whether it's self-medication, becoming in need of mental health services, whatnot, they cannot get that through the VA because of their discharge, correct?
Correct. So where do they go?
Yeah.
It's so this is where the linkage becomes really apparent and important. So we know that Black and African American, Latinx, and Hispanic, Indigenous folks, and trans folks are all most likely to be incarcerated. But they're also the most likely to hold OTH discharges. And if we don't see the linkage and don't start to break down that system, we're going to continue to see that perpetuation of harm and that continuum of harm that what we talk about from what happens in your military service that continues into your veteran world, continuum of harm stays. And without those acts, it's really hard because we all grapple with right and wrong and what criminality is and all of that. But I think it's a level of humanity that we need to really be tapping into here. We have to realize that nobody deserves to be homeless. Nobody deserves to be incarcerated. Nobody deserves to be hungry. These are not things that folks deserve. Folks deserve a basic dignity, even if you've done the wrong thing. I don't have to like you to advocate for you and your needs and for you to be treated as a human. And that's what folks, I think, are the basic things that people are asking for when they say, can we get the mental health treatment and access to the programs that are vital for folks who have OTH discharges.
All right, we got just a couple minutes here, but I want to use them to focus on what do we do to change it? What is the path forward, both socially within the military, culturally within the military, and, on the advocacy side and legislation-wise? What do you feel can be done that we need to do?
I think there's a lot we can do, but I think the biggest thing that we have to be right now is self-reflective. What we need to do is really grapple with the harm right now and really start to break that apart, because we see the linkage between the harm that's done and the trauma and the outcomes that we see. They're all connected. So within the military context, honestly, we need to start treating people more like people. We need to break down inherent bias. We need to stop treating people like they're undesirable as soon as they become not fit for duty at any point in their work, in their existence, because then they become. That happened to me, so I'm a little bit problem there. But it is really breaking down those cultural barriers and start to. I know that people are going to think that I'm this liberal utopia human being, but honestly, we need to find a way to treat people with dignity within the military and really truly recognize the value of human potential within the military. And if we don't treat it well or treat it like it's the most valuable thing that we have, we will continue to see these problems. So I think that like really taking a look at how do we treat people better and how do we break down inherent bias within the system so that we can stop perpetuating that harm. And on the VA side, I think continuing to, I don't even think that it's been passed yet to be able to actually access for OTH discharges through Senate. But that still needs to happen. And we still need to be able to make sure that those folks have basic access to benefits. But at the end of the day, we also need to break down culture in VA, because when it's not done, when we don't do anything about it in DOD, it becomes VA's problem. So looking at those cultural problems that we're seeing within the military context, we need to look at the same thing within VA. We need to look at bias within the healthcare practices, because we know that exists. Trans folks still can't get access to gender confirmation surgery, which is a basic human you can access it almost anywhere else within federal systems, I believe, and yet the VA, the secretary has the ability to allow this to happen. So looking at how can we break down some of these like barriers and bias that's built into the VA system and really recognize minority issues and hear from minorities about how they can fix it. So bringing those voices into the fold and making sure that it's minorities that are really advocating for their own needs.
So reflection and recognition. You can't really fix something that's broken if you don't recognize that it's broken. 100%. Lindsay, is there anything I didn't ask you that you want to talk to us about today?
I don't think so. I just want to express gratitude. I know DAV's really pushed hard on some of the issues that we've been advocating for, and so just want to express some gratitude. You know, the issues and challenges, like we've been proud of DAV's response. So just want to say thanks.
Thank you so much, Lindsay Church, Executive Director of Minority Veterans of America. Where can people go if they want to find out more about your organization?
If you want to learn more about us, you can find us at minorityvets.org, or you can find us on every social channel at Minority Vets.
Thank you so much for your time today, Lindsay.
Thank you so much.
Up next here on the DAV Podcast, we're going to look at the Veterans Consortium Discharge Upgrade Program. Sponsored by the DAV Charitable Service Trust, it reviews discharge cases and primarily represents veterans who received other than honorable discharge due to misconduct related to post-traumatic stress disorder, military sexual trauma, traumatic brain injury, and other related mental issues. The Discharge Upgrade Team also trains pro bono attorneys to represent veterans before military discharge review boards and boards of correction for military records. DAV caught up with TVC's program director, Danica Gonzalves, to learn more about the program and the various ways they help veterans.
All right, with us today, we got Danica Gonzalves. She is the program director for the Veteran Consortium's Discharge Upgrade Program. Thanks for being on today with us, Danica. Can you actually tell me, before we get started, tell me a little bit about what you do with the Veterans Consortium?
The Veterans Consortium Discharge Upgrade Program provides free legal representation nationwide to veterans that received less than honorable discharges due to behavior related to mental health conditions, such as PTSD and traumatic brain injury, military sexual trauma, or other mitigating factors such as homosexuality. So we do provide nationwide representation. If we're unable to provide representation, we do give resources and legal assistance to other veterans that are seeking a discharge upgrade.
Yeah, so most people don't realize that getting an other than honorable discharge can actually keep you from accessing some of the VA benefits that, you know, a lot of these veterans have earned. We got honorable discharges, general discharge under honorable conditions, other than honorable, and bad conduct discharges, as well as dishonorable discharges. Do you guys help with those latter two as well, or do you guys, is your work primarily within the other than honorable realm, if you will?
We focus on other than honorable discharges, but in some certain cases, we do take general discharges if there was military sexual trauma involved, or bad conduct discharges when it is the mental health was a significant factor in that misconduct.
And so basically, you guys will help anyone seeking a discharge or any kind of upgrade, if you will. Is that correct?
Yes, so we provide representation in some cases, but we will give legal assistance to anyone seeking a discharge upgrade, no matter what their discharge is.
Okay. All right. So what is the process for a veteran, when they get out and they realize, hey, I want a upgrade for this reason. I feel like it was a unfair discharge and I need to be able to access some VA benefits. What is the process that a veteran must go through to get an upgrade?
The first thing every veteran wants to do is request your records. The boards will assume that the records are correct. They're going to assume that your discharge is correct. They're going to assume that every write-up is correct. So you want to make sure what is in your records because you're going against your records. So that is a huge number one step that a lot of veterans don't take before they apply for a discharge upgrade. Once you get your records, you really want to make sure that you go through them and see every time there was any form of misconduct, whether it be a non-judicial punishment, a court martial, or even just a counseling, because you're going to need to explain all those instances of misconduct. So once you understand your records, you want to make sure you get the right form. There are two different forms you can apply for with a discharge upgrade. There's a form called the DD-149 and a form called the DD-293. So when you're looking at applying, you want to make sure that you pick the right board and use the right application. Once you figure out your audience and the form, you want to make sure that you write out a legal argument. So if you're going to a discharge review board, you do need to show that the discharge was either improper or inequitable. So when you're writing out why you deserve a discharge upgrade, you want to make sure that you use those buzzwords. You want to make sure that you say, my discharge was inequitable because, or my discharge was improper because. If you're going to the other board, you need to show that your discharge was either an error or an injustice. When you're writing out again on the form, you want to make sure you write, my discharge was an error because, or my discharge was an injustice because. And then one of the other most significant parts is then you need to provide evidence to support what you're saying. So if you're saying that your mental health was a factor in misconduct, you need to make sure that you provide the diagnostic paperwork and perhaps other medical notes that show that connection. But it is important to not only understand your records, pick the right board, but make sure that you write out a clear argument and supply the right evidence. Unfortunately, after you submit, it is a very long wait for a discharge upgrade decision. Right now, the shortest decisions about the discharge review boards are about 14 to 24 months. But if you're going to the other boards, right, if you're going to the other boards, like the Board for Correction Military Records, if you were in the Army, they're taking 3.5 to 4 years to make a decision. So this is a very frustrating process for the veterans, for the advocates, and you want to just make sure that you know what's going to happen when you're moving forward.
Yeah, that's certainly a lengthy process that I imagine can, be a source of frustration for a lot of veterans. But when the decision, when a favorable decision comes through, it can be life changing for them in a lot of ways, as far as what kind of VA benefits they're able to access because they were able to get a upgrade either alone or through the help of programs such as a Veterans Consortium. What are some of the common mistakes that you find veterans will make when they go it alone?
When veterans go alone, there's a lot of barriers when you're applying for these discharge upgrades. First, a lot of them don't get their records first. So when they're going through the process, they might not either remember every time they've been written up, or they might not remember the charges or anything along those lines. So they don't get their records, so they can't adequately explain. Okay. Another barrier is not writing that understandable legal argument, not putting those buzzwords, not showing why the discharge was either an error, improper, injustice, inequitable. And lastly, the most important thing that veterans fail to do when they apply on their own is supply evidence. So once again, you're going against the records. The burden is on you as the veteran. So you need to make sure that you're providing that evidence to support what you are saying. Even if you give them a comprehensible legal argument, and you might be right, you might actually have a winnable argument. But if you don't supply that evidence, then the board's likely not going to rule in your favor.
Any advice that you can give a veteran who's seeking the discharge upgrade beyond making sure that you get your records and review them and put forth that legal argument?
If you're able, try to reach out to an advocate. If you can, like I said, the discharge upgrade program will at minimum provide you the resources, the correct form, and that way you know a little more when you're going throughout the process by yourself. There may be even legal clinics that help with discharge upgrades in your area. There may be other nonprofit organizations. So do a little bit of research. Go online, Google discharge upgrades assistance, and see if there's anyone either in your area, or you can contact the Veterans Consortium to at least understand a little bit more before you go at it on your own.
Okay. And if I remember correctly, your website is vetsprobono.org.
Yes, or they can call us at 202-733-3324.
And, you mentioned reach out to an advocate, reach out to these clinics. In some previous interviews I've had with other veterans who were seeking a discharge, they said they went it alone 3-4 times, kept getting, rejected, but that's because they weren't aware that there are programs such as the Veterans Consortium that provide free legal assistance to them who exist to help veterans get this done. I believe we spoke in a previous conversation, the Veterans Consortium, you guys help 2,000 veterans you guys provide representation to 2,000 veterans per year. Is that correct?
We provide legal assistance to over 2,000 veterans a year. So over 2,000 veterans contact our program in a given year, and we can at least provide them the assistance that they need if they decide to go at it alone.
All right. And one thing that we have talked about in this podcast with Lindsay was the overrepresentation regarding minority veterans in relation to bad conduct discharges. What can you tell us about that?
Minority veterans are more likely to receive bad conduct or less than honorable discharges than their white colleagues. This is also seen in just infractions being written up, whether it be non-judicial punishment, court-martials, etc. Minority service members at the time are more likely to be written up for misconduct. And it's a vicious cycle. If you're more likely to be written up for misconduct, you're more likely to get kicked out. So we're going to be seeing this circle until something is addressed internally in the military itself.
Danica Gonzalves, she's the program director for the Veteran Consortium's Discharge Upgrade Program. Appreciate you being on with us today, Danica. Thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you, Todd.
And Dan, I actually just heard some great news about a veteran that we've been working with on a discharge upgrade through the Veterans Consortium. She's an MST survivor and had been denied veterans benefits for decades because of her discharge status, even though her attacker was ultimately put in prison for a series of sexual assaults, to include hers. So we know that they're really doing great work for so many veterans through that program, many wrongs being righted. So they're doing important work. One of the other issues I think it's important to address as we work through this podcast is just how we build community for veterans. In many cases, as was mentioned in Lindsay's interview, for some people, there's this sense that they may not belong in one community or another, or that there just isn't this shared experience between themselves and other veterans. And a lot of that, I think, comes down to just being open and having these one-on-one conversations with people that you can connect with. So Matt St. Sing had a chance to talk with Rona Matlow, who is a DAV Life member and former chapter service officer, about this very topic. Rona has a very unique and interesting history, and it has some great perspective on this topic that I think we can all learn from and really apply it to how we approach building the veteran community in a more inclusive and compassionate way.
Hi, I'm Matt Sainsing, Assistant National Communications Director for DAV in Washington, D.C., and I'm here with Rona Matlow, who's a 22-year Navy veteran, hails from Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm in Washington, D.C., and through the magic of modern technology, we're able to have this conversation. How are you doing today, Rona?
I'm doing great, Matt. How are you?
I'm awesome. I'm excited to have this conversation. I kind of want to ask you about your service in the world's finest Navy. I understand you served, is it 22 years?
Yeah, just about 22 years. I enlisted in 1979 and I retired the end of 2000. So just a couple months shy of 22 years.
And what did you do in the Navy? What was your job?
I was a nuclear enlisted person. My rating was machinist mate. And then after being commissioned, I was a nuclear power line officer and went up through to the rank of lieutenant commander. After a number of sea tours, I taught at the Nuclear Power School, and I also tested the Global Command and Control System at the Navy's testing force.
Wow.
And my final tour at the Pacific Fleet Headquarters in Hawaii, which is a great way to end the Navy time.
I'm sure.
I was the Pacific Fleet Tomahawk cruise missile manager.
What was it like being a nuclear officer on a submarine?
Well, the hardest thing for me about being on a submarine was the fact that we had an independent duty corpsman who wasn't very good, and he didn't treat an ear infection properly and destroyed my left ear and killed my submarine career.
Oh no! I'm sorry, I did not know that. I didn't mean to bring up a traumatizing thing, but wow.
That's why I ended up on the surface fleet after that.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. And so you got out right around the year 2000 or 2001?
Yeah, I got out 9 months before September 11th.
Gotcha. What was that like, to be a brand new minted veteran on 9/11?
Well, let me tell you, I was a grad school student at the time, getting master's degrees in Jewish Ed and Jewish Studies at a Jewish Studies college. And I was sitting at home working on schoolwork, listening to a jazz station. We lived in Philly, so very close to New York. And, they announced the first plane had hit the tower. And, it's like, oh, well, this is awful. And then they announced the second one. And I didn't know whether the school was going to happen or not. They hadn't told us anything. But I go to the college, and the college is locked up. No signs or anything. It's just locked up. So I go back home and I go over to the synagogue, and my buddy who was the office manager there and who was a retired A6 pilot, and we're both standing there and we're looking at each other. Okay, what do we do now? Shave off our beards and put on our uniforms and show up at Willow Grove and report for duty? And it's just like, we didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
There was no precedent. And
right.
we actually called the base ops officer and asked them if they wanted us to report for duty, because we thought that's what we were supposed to do at that point.
Jeez, that's absolutely wild. I mean, I was in high school when 9/11 happened, and it was a time when I was already committed to joining the Army, but I had not shipped out yet. I just essentially signed the paperwork, right? And so it kind of it jolted. It's like, oh, what are these years going to be like? Right? I was in from 2003 to 2009, so right during the height of the Iraq War, right? And that kind of characterized my experience for sure. But you mentioned you were in a Jewish college, and I understand you're an ordained rabbi. Is that correct?
I am, yeah.
So walk me through that journey of getting out of the Navy and, deciding to become a rabbi.
Well, it's kind of funny. Excuse me. When I was at Uptev 4 in the mid-90s, it looked like I was going to be retiring early because of budget cuts and forced drawdowns after Desert Storm. And so I was getting a master's in engineering management at Old Dominion in Norfolk. And, sometimes things happen in unexpected ways. one night I'm sitting in a lecture in the capstone class, the final course for this program, and I have this big aha moment that I shouldn't go be a defense contractor working on weapons systems, which is where I was being programmed to do. Get the master's in engineering management, be a professional engineer, and manage some weapons system. But rather, I should have a sharp turn and go be a rabbi. And it was a big revelation to me. I don't know why, but it was. So I listened. And in our book Pirkei Avot, The Teachings of the Sages, which is the last book of the Talmud, the rabbis teach us, get for yourself a rabbi and make for yourself a friend. So I contacted the rabbi at Temple Israel on Granby Street, right outside Naval Operating Base in Norfolk, and he became my teacher, and I started learning. And the rest is history, as they say.
Yeah.
So I went to Graz, got 2 master's degrees, went to the Academy for Jewish Religion in New York, got ordained in 2009. But along the way, injuries from my last ship caught up with me, and I ended up on 100% disability as well. And almost didn't finish my school, but just through force of will, I was able to get there.
It sounds like the faith kind of just threw a wrench in the pathway and kind of, I don't want to say derailed you, but put you on a different path for sure. I definitely think there are parallels to religious faith and military service in that there are very much ways to foster a community, right? And so I'm curious, how have wearing these 2 hats influenced your sense of community?
Yeah, so, as I mentioned, I ended up on 100% disability due to injuries on my last ship. And so after I was ordained, I realized that getting employment really wasn't a likelihood. So we moved to Olympia, Washington. This allowed my wife to be near her family, and especially near her mother, who was getting older and not doing so hot. And so I became active at DAV Chapter 41 in Olympia as a chapter service officer, as a chaplain and counselor. And so I served as well with the chapter as chapter chaplain and eventually chapter adjutant as well. So I was pretty involved there. After a few years, I had to stop doing the service work because I started developing really bad headaches as a result of my injuries.
Okay.
I was already 100%, so I couldn't claim the headaches, but it was also part of the whole package. So I stopped doing the service office work, but I continue to provide de facto service work in that anytime I see somebody on social media, or if I run across somebody on the street who's a vet, and I see that they're a vet, I'll check in with them. Hey, are you up to date on your benefits?
Yeah.
And a lot of times they'll say, well, I haven't even ever filed a claim, or well, I don't know. I ask them, do you know about the Gulf War presumptive conditions list if they're a post 9/11 vet? And they say, what? Or if they're a Vietnam vet, do you know about the Agent Orange conditions
Oh,
list?
yeah.
I don't know about that. Most people don't know what they're entitled to, but I can still serve.
Yeah.
In addition, I'm a highly skilled pastoral counselor. And, I had a lot of training working in hospitals as a hospital chaplain. And I just naturally have an innate ability to do this work as well. And so I've done a lot of office counseling work as well with veterans dealing with combat trauma and military sexual trauma. And contrary to what people may believe, it's not just women who suffer MST.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of men that I've run into have suffered MST as well. And, there's no shame in admitting that you've experienced trauma. And there's no shame in seeking help. The biggest shame is that if you don't seek help and you're suffering needlessly. So I urge people, if you're experiencing any kind of trauma, reach out, call the National Helpline 1-800-273-TALK and select option 1. Go to your VA hospital's behavioral health walk-in clinic. contact a local crisis line, go to the vet center, do something. Don't just sit there and be miserable.
But I would like to encourage anyone out there who is kind of on the fence about submitting a claim. Please reach out to someone at DAV. They will take care of you, and you do not have to be a member, although you're always welcome to join our ranks, and it's always free of service. So please do not hesitate. Act today. And before we leave, though, I should mention that in 2015, you began to transition from male to female. And I kept that information kind of on hold on purpose, because I think there's a lot of people out there listening. It's going to be their first time hearing the story of a veteran who happens to be a transgender individual. And what do you want them to know about what it's like to be a trans veteran?
What it's like to be a trans veteran is that we're trying to survive just like everybody else. And, people think that we're making it up, that we're imagining it, and that we're, perverting God's laws and things like that. So I wrote this book to show how we're not perverting God's creation. We are God's children too.
The title is We Are God's Children Too. Yep.
And the website for that is ronamatlow.com. And the whole point of the book, it's partly my autobiography, but it's also gets into detail with a lot of technical stuff and religious stuff to show that, in fact, we were created exactly how God intended us to be created. And we're living exactly how God intended us to live. And one of the things I told my brother, who didn't believe me when I first came out, and I will tell this to anybody who doesn't believe, is when I started taking estrogen, the cross-gender female hormones, it was like a life-saving thing. It's like when you give antibiotics to somebody with a life-threatening infection and they survive. But if you give estrogen to a cisgender man, somebody whose gender identity aligns with their sexual assignment at birth, they will become extremely miserable. And so my comment to anybody who challenges my identity is, fine, take estrogen for a couple of weeks. It's not going to do you any physical changes or physical damage. It's not going to turn you into a girl, but it will make you go sugar. It'll make you go crazy really quickly. Because if you have the wrong sex hormone coursing through your veins, it's going to cause you pain. But for somebody like me, it makes me whole. When I've had to stop my estrogen for surgery a couple of times, my depression went through the roof, sky high. My physical pain from my injuries went through the roof, sky high. This is conclusive evidence that this is a physical manifestation of who I am. It's not just a psychiatric disorder, which is what has been claimed. This is a physical autonomic response of my identity.
Interesting. I think I've not heard that before, so that's eye-opening for me. And I would say too that DAV is absolutely an inclusive veterans organization, no matter where you come from, no matter who you call God, no matter who you pray to, what your gender identity is. There is room for you in the DAV. I think one of the great things the military does is it takes people from all walks of life, bonds them together, and then they give them the task of accomplishing the mission. And I think research has shown out there that, that really helps to form a national identity. It is a form of nation building to bring people from all corners of the country, have them go out to sea and then they come back and they go back home, right? And they all have this shared experience. And I think there's definitely an allegory there with veterans writ large, and fostering a sense of community. So what do you say to veterans out there who are missing some of that community and kind of are yearning for it?
Well, there's a couple of groups of veteran communities out there that are really hurting right now. One is the homeless veteran community. And it's a really complex situation, and people become very, very critical about homeless, unhoused people. and they don't understand the complex nature that leads somebody to become homeless. And they just say, oh, well, they're just druggies, or they're destructive people, they're outlaws, whatever. But they don't understand the kinds of betrayal that have led to somebody not wanting to come into a place. The other, one last group is immigrant veterans. We have a large group of immigrant veterans who were promised naturalization in boot camp. And what happened instead is they were never naturalized at boot camp. They served, they were sent overseas to combat. They came back with PTSD. And because they were immigrants, they weren't treated properly, didn't get their PTSD taken care of. And so, like our homeless veterans, they end up turning to self-medication for their PTSD. They get street drugs. And, so the federal government, the entire system has betrayed these groups of veterans so mercilessly. It's a national tragedy.
It is a national tragedy how many veterans out there who were negatively affected by a not so perfect storm of issues that caused them to have problems down the line. So I'm glad you're shining a light on this important issue. And Rona, our time is coming to a close now, so I really appreciate you being here today and to kind of sharing your story and to kind of open the conversation about some veterans, should we say unique veterans, and the issues they face and building the community writ large. So thanks again for being with me today.
Thanks, Matt.
All right, as we wrap up today's podcast, lots of good stories and things to talk about there. If you enjoyed this, you'll likely enjoy many of our other podcasts. We invite you to check those out, dav.org/podcast. If you're a veteran in need of help, you can check out all of our resources available to you at dav.org. Or if you want to help us help veterans, you can donate there too. And we encourage you to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and definitely be sure to subscribe, as I mentioned, to the podcast wherever you listen. Ashley, this one was certainly some nice topics here to discuss today, and we've already discussed so many on the podcast, and lots of good things ahead.
So yeah, Dan, we've got the 20th anniversary of 9/11 coming up. So we're going to have some experiences and voices that are going to lend themselves to the story of really how the events of that day shaped that generation of military members and veterans. And I would recommend going back and looking through the library of our podcasts. For those who may not know, past National Commander Jim Searsley had passed away recently. And we have a fantastic podcast that details his story, his Alive Day story. And I really just think that's one of the best ones in our lineup. If you haven't listened to it, please go back, take a listen, and find yourself inspired, as we all have, by Jim's life.
No doubt about that. We started with that great one, many others since then. And always good catching up with you, Ashley, for Ashley and all of us here at DAV. I'm Dan Klaskins, thanking you for listening to another edition of the DAV Podcast.